Hey guys, it's Lynn Pratt. Today I'm going to show you how to print a reference photo that is larger than an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So I have my photo that I want to paint, the outline that I'm going to trace for the tutorial that I want to do. So I have just the outline, but you can do the same thing if it's a reference photo. So if this is your reference photo, you can do the same thing with this. I just find that it uses a lot of ink, so I like doing a line drawing and printing that out large, so I'm not printing out all those colors. But you can do the same exact thing with your regular photo, your reference photo of whatever you want to paint. So I have my line drawing. I have it cropped in my Photoshop program to the size I want it. So my image is actually 21 by 15 inches. All I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File and I'm going to go to Print. Now, my print scale, you want to make sure that your scale is printing at 100%. Now, if you're printing this in a different program, of course it might look a little bit different. So you want to choose your printer, and because this is a horizontal layout, I'm going to choose that my layout's horizontal. I could choose vertical, but with horizontal, I know that I can fit each one. I can just print 4 sheets and overlap them for a 21 by 15 painting. So I have the horizontal orientation. I'm making sure my scale is at 100%, and I'm just going to grab and click on my image and drag it so that the corner of my image is within my screen. So once I have that corner in, I'm just going to go to print. Now it's printed that top left quarter of my image. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to go to print again. Now on my computer it saves where I have already printed. So then I'm just going to take my image and I'm going to drag it all the way to the other side to make sure that I can see the edge, that top edge. So now I'm printing the top right hand quadrant and I'm going to hit print. I'm going to do the same thing, dragging it up and doing the bottom right, hitting print, and then printing my last one, which is my bottom left, dragging it right to the edge so I know I have that edge nicely on my paper, and hitting print. Now the important thing is that when you're in this print menu, you have your printer selected. For this particular one, I have it in the horizon view, and that your scale is 100%. If your scale changes, you're going to print your image at the wrong scale. So if you have your image at 21 by 15 already, you want to make sure that scale is 100%. However, if your image that you want to print is a small image, you can easily change this scale and print it at a different size. So if your image is smaller or bigger, by changing that scale, you can print it at any size you want. So if you have a large image and you want to just print it on a small piece of paper, you just change your scale here in your printing menu. Now that I have all 4 corners of my sheet printed, I'm simply going to trim the edges. Now I just use a super simple paper trimmer to do it. I just put it in, go right up to the edge, and I know that I have a larger overlap, so I can trim a little bit off. Obviously, if you don't have a paper trimmer, this is not important at all. You can easily just do it, trim your edges with your scissors. But I like that I don't have this extra paper that doesn't print on the edge printing out. So I just like taking my paper cutter and trimming it down. I know that I have this part here already, so I'll trim these down just a little bit more so that I don't have a huge amount of paper that's overlapping, because it's harder to trace through that area. Then I'm simply going to take my image and see where they overlap. I just take regular tape, I match my image up, match the edge up, match that line, match this line, make sure everything matches up perfectly. And then I simply just tape my image together. I try to put the tape where there's not a line that I'll have to trace. So I don't want to put a piece of tape here because this line would be hard to trace with the tape over it. So I put it where there's a line not to trace. Now remember, if you don't just have a line drawing, it's much easier to match up an actual reference photo if you've printed it out with all the color. But I'm going to keep just trimming these inside edges of my image and taping them together so that I have that full 15 by 21 full image to trace from. Now my 4 pieces of regular printer paper are taped together, all perfectly aligned so that my edges are straight. I take a ruler and I make sure that all the edges are aligned perfectly and straight so it's all the right size before I am ready to transfer it onto my paper. Now I have my printed image taped down with some masking tape right on top of my watercolor paper. So I have it taped down so that it doesn't move while I'm tracing it. I prefer to use Sorel wax-free transfer paper. I use the graphite kind. It comes in different colors depending on what you're using it for. You can get white, blue, yellow, red, but I like the graphite kind. It's wax-free. I find this is the best to use with watercolor. It doesn't bead up on the edge. When I get it, it comes in a roll. So I actually just leave mine right in a roll. I don't cut it, and that way I can just take it and the dark side down, I put it right under my paper and I can just unroll it right through, put it right up to the edge very carefully. And then I like using a colored pen to trace. I get a very small fine point tip so I get a nice crisp line. If I use a red pen, then when I trace over my image, I can see where I have traced already. So then I'm just going to carefully press down hard enough to get it to transfer through, but not so hard that I'm going to make a dent in my paper. But you can see that by using the red pen, now I can see that I've traced this, where if I did it in a pencil, it would kind of look the same as the others. Then you can always just lift up your paper and check and make sure that it's transferring through the right darkness that you want it. So that's pretty good. So you don't want to press down too hard, but you want to make sure you're pressing down enough, and every once in a while just pick it up, peek under, and make sure that you're transferring really well. I also like to transfer my edge lines so I know where to put my tape right up to. So I'm going to go through and trace all of these lines. When I get down to the bottom, I'll just slide my transfer paper down and trace the bottom as well. Now when you're transferring, you want to make sure that you're not pushing down on the paper, because if you push down, it does the same thing as using the pen and you'll get dark smudges all over your paper. It's very messy to use. There's lots of other ways to transfer an image. I honestly suggest just drawing your image out, but if I'm doing something for a class and everyone is using the same image to start, I always transfer it to make sure that I'm having the same exact image that they are for a class. When I'm doing my own paintings, I prefer to draw it with a pencil on my paper. But especially if you're just beginning, this is a great way to do it to get your image perfected so that you can really work on your painting technique. But I definitely recommend that you work on drawing as well. But you can go ahead and transfer your image, and once that's down, then you're ready to paint. So I've fully traced my image with my red pen, so I can see that I've traced everywhere that I need to, so I can go ahead and take my tape off. Now, I did not trace my full edge line because I noticed that sometimes it just gets all yucky on the edges, tracing those big lines. So I just mark where my edges are, and then when I move this, I just take my trace paper off. I have those edges marked, and I can go back with my ruler, and I like using a 2H pencil. It's a little bit harder lead than standard, and I'll just take my ruler and go where I marked those lines, and I'll put in the edge of my drawing lines as well. So I'll just take that and draw it down to those little marks that I made and put in my outline so I know right where my tape needs to go up against. Now, if there's any areas where my graphite paper, my transfer paper, got on here, I use a kneaded eraser. So it's just an eraser that you can kind of mush around and pull. I open it up to a clean part, and I just simply blot on the paper, and I can pick up any of that extra graphite anywhere where I might have pushed down with my hand or anything like that where I don't want those extra smudges. After I've picked up a little bit, I just pull it open, get to a fresh spot, and pick it up again. So also, if you've traced your lines anywhere and you don't want them that dark, you can easily go over the lines themselves and lift them up a little bit if you want to make them lighter. On this one, I don't need to do that, but on some, if I'm doing a white flower or a light image, sometimes you really want to lift some of that extra graphite up. So once I've gone through and done this, drawn my lines, now I'm fully transferred and ready to paint. Now I have my image transferred, I have it all taped down to my board, and I am all set to paint. Now I use 300-pound paper, so I don't stretch it at all. I simply tape it down and paint right on. If you're using 140-pound, or if you prefer to stretch your paper, you definitely want to wet it down, stretch it, let it dry before you transfer your image. If you transfer this image first and then wet it all down and stretch your paper, a lot of that image is going to disappear when you wet it down. If you're doing a painting where you're using a lot of wet into wet and you're using transfer paper, you might want to go over your lines again with a 2H pencil before you put any water on the paper, because the transfer image lifts a lot easier than a pencil image does. So you just want to keep that in mind. If you're not using a big wet into wet wash, you don't have to go over them at all. But if you're using lots of layers, you definitely want to add a little bit more pencil line to your images. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to transfer a large image onto your watercolor paper. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. And I am going to do this as a full tutorial in my Patreon online school, the painting from beginning to end, so you can check that out as well coming up. Thanks a lot. Let's paint.